everyone, and welcome back to the Gnomon live stream presented by Lenovo. I'm Kyle Brown, Gnomon instructor and your host this evening. I'm thrilled to be here with you all. We are streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch this evening. If you require closed captioning, please head over to our Facebook stream, Gnomon_school. You can get it there. As you watch along, we do encourage you guys to post your questions for our guest this evening, and we will get to as many as we can during tonight's Q&A after our presentation. We are really excited. We have a really exciting stream for you all tonight. The making of Netflix's The Sea Beast. Really great film, and I'm very excited to talk to our panel this evening. In an era when terrifying beasts roamed the seas, monster hunters were celebrated heroes, and none were more beloved than the great Jacob Holland. But when young Maisie Brumble stows away on his fabled ship, he's saddled with an unexpected ally. Together, they embark on an epic journey into uncharted waters and make history. From Academy Award-winning filmmaker Chris Williams, Moana, Big Hero 6, and Bolt, The Sea Beast takes us to where the map ends and the true adventure begins. It's my true pleasure to introduce our panel tonight, starting with writer and director Chris Williams. Chris Williams is an Academy Award-winning director and writer of animated films. Chris has been drawing since he could hold a pencil, and growing up, he was obsessed with visual storytelling. He is a graduate of the University of Waterloo's Fine Art program and Sheridan College Animation program. Upon graduation, he moved to Los Angeles and began his career in animation, which spans across iconic films such as the Academy Award-nominated Bolt, Academy Award-nominated Moana, and Big Hero 6, which won the Academy Award in 2015, along with many others. The Sea Beast is Williams' debut at Netflix. Welcome, Chris.
Hello. How you doing?
Great. How are you this evening?
Great. Hey, that reel up front was amazing. I'm so pumped now for this conversation.
Right? Gets us in the right mood. Well, yeah.
It was really incredible work.
Absolutely. No, a great body of work by our students here at Gnomon, and obviously a great body of work here in the CB. So I can't wait to jump into it tonight with you this evening. Next up, we have production designer Matthias Lechner. In 1970, he was born in Mannheim, Germany. Matthias spent his youth in an idyllic South German setting. Sounds wonderful. In 1990, he moved to Hamburg to find his place in the awakening German animation industry. Later, he studied classical animation in Dublin, Ireland, and moved as an animation nomad to Hamburg, Seoul, Copenhagen, Toronto, and Montreal, Vancouver, and Los Angeles. For 30 years, he has worked as an art director and production designer on a number of European and American animated features, like Disney's Zootopia and Ralph Breaks the Internet. At the moment, he is a production designer for Netflix Animation and lives with his wife, daughter, and cat in Ventura, California. Welcome, Matthias.
Hey.
Thrilled to have you this evening.
Yeah, sorry to say the cat got eaten by a coyote, but the rest was
no. Oh, no. Oh, I am incredibly sorry to hear that. Well, that's
I shocked Chris.
Terrible.
I have to change my bio.
I'm so sorry.
We'll have to find a silver lining here somewhere.
Yeah, let's pick up the pieces here.
Pick up the pieces. Oh, I'm sorry, Matthias. Well, we'll jump on to something a little bit more upbeat here with animation director Zach Parrish. Parrish currently works as an animation director at Netflix Animation, the role he served on The Sea Beast. Before joining NAS, Parrish worked at Walt Disney Animation Studios for 10 plus years, where he worked as an animator on Tangled, Zootopia, Moana, and Raya the Last Dragon, animation supervisor on Wreck-It Ralph, and head of animation for Big Hero 6. And he directed two short films, Us Again and Puddles. He is passionate about all things animation, filmmaking, and storytelling in general. Welcome, Zach.
Hi, everybody.
Awesome. Thrilled to have you as well. And of course, last but not least, we have head of character animation, Joshua Beveridge. Beveridge joined Imageworks in 2005, and his credits include the Academy Award-winning Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Storks, Hotel Transylvania 2, Alice in Wonderland, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, I Am Legend, Surf's Up, Open Season, The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and Arthur Christmas. He received a Visual Effects Society award for his contribution in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse and nominated for I Am Legend. He is a member of the ASI-FA. Fantastic. Well, welcome, Joshua.
Hi there. Hi there.
Thrilled to have you. Well, welcome all, guys. We're absolutely thrilled that you took some time this evening to join us here at the Gnomon live stream to talk about the Sea Beast. And told you guys a little bit before, I watched the movie myself. I absolutely loved it. It's really a breathtaking film. Love the art direction, and I can't wait to see what you guys have in store for us this evening. So I won't blabber on any longer. I want to hand it over to you guys with the really important stuff, why everyone's here tonight. So I think, Chris, you're gonna take us into this journey here and start us off. So
That's right.
The floor is all yours, sir.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you again for having us. This is very exciting. I'm Chris, and I'm the director of the movie, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about the process of making the film and get into things that I've learned about story construction and how we approach the daunting task of putting together a feature film. And I'm gonna start by getting into the origins of the Sea Beast, where it all came from. So I'm gonna go all the way back to young Chris Williams here. When I was a kid, I loved drawing and writing, and I used to make little comic strips, and I used to make stop motion films, and I always loved movies. And I particularly loved adventure stories. I used to love the old Harryhausen stop motion films, and I remember studying every inch of the Road Warrior poster before I was old enough to see the movie. And I remember I was always particularly drawn to like the big sweeping action adventure films like Raiders of the Lost Ark and King Kong. And I know the 70s version of King Kong is not considered the good version, but it was my version, and I absolutely loved it. There's something about the uncharted island and the voyage into the unknown that was always very intriguing to me. But my mom was very concerned about what her movie-obsessed son, who spent a lot of time drawing in his bedroom, was going to do for a living. So she encouraged me to pursue animation. And I didn't want my mom to be mad at me, of course. So I went off to study animation at Sheridan College in Canada, where I'm from. And it's there that my love for animation really took root. After that, I was fortunate enough to get hired at Disney Animation as a storyboard artist. And later I got an opportunity to direct. And I worked there for 25 years. And I had a good experience. And I worked on movies that I'm really proud of. And after spending half my life there, I was quite comfortable, but I was concerned that I was becoming too comfortable and worried about becoming complacent. And so I wanted to throw myself into something entirely new. So I made the difficult decision to leave Disney Animation and come to Netflix Animation. That turned out to be a very energizing and exciting moment for me to become part of something that was just getting off the ground. And I couldn't help but see parallels between the story I was working on about characters sailing off into unfamiliar worlds and my own journey into the unknown. And I've always loved those old sea monster maps. There's something about them that is so evocative and romantic. And I really like the maps that were incomplete, with areas that would just fade off into nothingness. I found that nothingness to be so compelling. And they would populate those areas with sea monsters. There was just an impulse to make those areas more exciting and more dangerous. And I would look at those maps and I always thought, man, that'd make a really cool world for an animated movie. So I made one. I had an idea. So I had an idea for a world and a vague notion of the tone or the personality of the movie that I wanted to make. But a lot happens between the initial inspiration and a finished film, a whole lot, as you will see. The story started with me jotting down thematic notions and character descriptions, which is where I usually like to start. And that expanded into an outline that kept filling out and evolving. And eventually it spilled into a script. But a script is not a movie. And as many of you know, feature animation really relies on the storyboarding process to bring the story to life through a series of screenings. Storyboard reels will really reveal the truth. And you're going to find things that work really well and things that don't work at all. And it's during this phase that will go on for years that we'll bring together a group of storyboard artists. Usually it's 7 to 10 artists and normally a writer or two. and you work together to build the story. And that to me is the fun part and the most critical phase of story development. And it's during this phase that we emphasize two things, collaboration and iteration. Collaboration is so fundamental to animation, but it must always be encouraged and protected because a collaborative environment is difficult to achieve in reality. In some ways, I think it fights human nature. People generally find it easier to agree than disagree. And people want to be told that their ideas are great and that they're geniuses. But if that's all the feedback you ever get, the story will never get any better. So you have to set aside ego and rise above the very human desire for affirmation. You have to foster an environment where people feel comfortable bringing their ideas and disagreeing with each other, and certainly disagreeing with me. It's a big part of the job because disagreement, fundamentally, I think, is good. If someone offers an idea that's different than your own and you like it, great, take it, it's yours. If not, it allows you to explain your point of view, and maybe you'll come to understand your own movie more deeply. So you must embrace the chaos of conflicting points of view and the volatility of strong opinions. And you'll find these incredible moments. And they're moments that I really live for when dissenting points of view will come together and collide and create something new, which is that third better idea that never would have seen the light of day had there not been space provided for open debate. But even as you're engaging in that vigorous debate, you have to be respectful, because when people present their ideas, they make themselves very vulnerable. When people talk about story, when we close the door to the story room and start talking about the movie, people are drawing from their own life experience. And we will talk about things that we love or hate or find funny or outrageous or sad. And on some level, we're saying, this is who I am and this is how I think. And the line between who you are and what you do for a living starts to become very blurry. So while disagreement is good, things can never get personal. We certainly had many awesome, intense, and passionate debates in the course of making The Sea Beast, and it's where many of the best ideas came from. But all the ideas in the world are not helpful if you're not open to change. And that's where iteration comes in. After working as a story artist and a director for decades now, really internalized the idea that change is good. And The Sea Beast certainly changed a lot. In the initial script, there was no Maisie Brumble. The story focused on a baby that was stolen by the fiendish Captain Crow. And it became Jacob's mission to return the poor child to his mother. As a script, it seemed to work and people responded really well to it. But when we put together our first screening on story reels, it was clear that it didn't work and we had to come up with something else. At one point, Jacob was a carefree guy who didn't want responsibility. He didn't want to inherit the ship. He didn't want to be captain of the inevitable. We also tried a version where Jacob was physically and mentally broken and racked with guilt. And neither of these versions were right, but going down those roads helped us find our Jacob. At one point, there was a scene where Jacob and Admiral Hornigold had a sword fight on the deck of the Imperator. And later they were marooned on an island together where they became allies. And later still, Hornigold sacrificed himself in a final act of atonement. This then freed Jacob from a swarm of monsters and allowed him to continue with the mission. Captain Crow died many deaths. He was shot by the abducted child's mother in one version. He was swallowed by Red in another. He drowned in the sinking ship before being rescued by Jacob, and later drowning again. The question of whether Crow would live or die was one of the most fiercely debated in the story room over the years. But I wanted him to live, and sometimes you just have to say, I'm the director. Every iteration is just a means to an end. A screening is not a movie. It's a tool to help you find the movie. It offers a better vantage point from which to see what the movie will be one day. So change is good. But as a director, you have to find a balance. You have to have the strength of your convictions while being receptive to new ideas and have the humility to know that sometimes you're wrong. You must always be challenging your assumptions about the story and encouraging others to do the same, and accept that change almost always makes the story better. So don't cling to the safety of what is known, venture off into the unknown, and good things will happen. I will finish by saying that ever since I could hold a pencil, I have been drawing and I've been writing stories. And I always loved it. but now I'm fortunate to work alongside incredibly talented artists that challenge each other and support each other. Animation is without a doubt the most collaborative art form that there is. It takes hundreds of artists and managers years to create one work of art. And sometimes I think it's a miracle that they come together at all. Every person who works on an animated movie gives so much of themselves, and every person contributes in a fundamental and indispensable way. One person absolutely cannot sail a ship. It takes a whole crew. So on behalf of the crew of the Sea Beast, I want to thank you very much. And I'm going to hand it off now to Matthias.
Thanks, Chris. Let's start with you. We met at a party, I knew you before, but in 2019, Chris pitched the idea that he was working on to me on a party. And that story he wanted to tell for a long time. It was set in a world of giant sea monsters and monster hunters. And that sounded really intriguing to me. The fight between the monsters and the humans had been going on for centuries and had cost many lives on both sides. And what was interesting is that Chris wanted this to be a movie with amazing action, but also with real peril, with danger that people could really get hurt. And it had like an edge to it that sounded really interesting to me. And his original inspiration, as he told you, came from those maps with sea monsters that map makers painted in the areas that weren't explored yet. So this is the map that Jacob has in the movie. And so it was going to be a journey into the unknown. It was like my first movie for Netflix, same as Chris, same as everybody else. And so let's talk a little bit about the journey and the design and the inspiration. When I arrived, Chris had already had a lot of these illustrations on the wall, pictures by N.C. Wyeth. And it's amazing the sense of adventure and the way he draws clouds and sails is just spectacular. I love the painters of the Hudson River School and Remington here in particular. I love the use of bold and vibrant color in natural settings. And that's the combination that I really wanted to implement in the look for our movie. Also, I'm a big fan of Caspar David Friedrich, and when you see those paintings in the museums, they're actually really big, and he captures this like large and cinematic scale very well. So I want to talk a little bit about finding the style for the movie. We set out to find the perfect balance between more realistic style than usual, but at the same time keeping that charm and the fun that classic animation movies have. So the first thing was I wanted the world to be immersive and believable. The ships, for example, are built so they're fully functional, and generally shapes are not exaggerated. The scale is very important. So a connection to reality helps the audience to grasp the size of objects and spaces really easily. The characters we designed they're not realistic or motion captured, but they're also not quite as squashy or exaggerated like typically in animation. The eyes, for example, are less oversized, and the animation itself is a little more controlled. The textures are very rich and detailed and immersive. We took some liberties, for example, simplifying the skin, the human skin, a little bit to avoid the uncanny valley when things get uncomfortably realistic. And then colors were very important to me, and they're set up as strong themes in the movie and in the color script. So, for example, a general thing is there's like a world of us versus them, and that's portrayed in the movie as red versus green. Or here you can see the color yellow that I'm using for anger and corruption that slowly sneaks in on Crow during the movie. In the beginning, there's a big sequence with the fight against the Brickleback that's like pure adventure, and we're using very crisp blue skies and white clouds. And here in this shot with Maisie, you can see the use of like lavender and magenta to show the wonder and aspiration. Sony Imageworks was our partner making this movie, and they did a fantastic job with the water effects, which adds a lot to the believability and that grasping of scale that I talked about in the beginning. We did try to stylize the sky a little bit in the vein of N.C. Wyeth, but we found that it needed realism for the world to feel vast and open. We try to be wherever possibly authentic and true to the period. So, for example, even in those woodcut illustrations that you see in the book, we wanted the film to feel lit with natural light. Of course, nothing is natural in animation, but I wanted to ground it in reality, especially in the fantastic parts. And it was important to light the scenes with available light sources to make the set look not staged, to make the set look natural. So I want to talk a little bit about the design work itself. We were so lucky to have Tony Fucili, that you might know from Incredibles. He was tasked with designing the humans on our film, and he does this enormous amount of sketches and choices. And you can see some of his sketches, and then on the left, our art director, Woon Yang Young, finalized them in a painting. One of the starting points for Maisie was Hush Puppy from the movie Beast of the Southern Wild. And Michelle Clapton, who is a costume designer for Game of Thrones, helped us with a variety of illustrations, and she actually sent us physical samples of different materials like fish leather, and we used some of that in the costume of Captain Crow. So she also did these designs and patterns, and we used those designs and materials, and then we had to, of course, translate them to match the character design in our film itself. For the design of the main monster, Andreas Blasic created this beautiful and elegant sculpture that we then scanned in and used as a base for a model. And the red color of red was already important as part of the script. And so we leaned into the simplicity of it and emphasized the difference to the less saturated colors of the human world. And I also like the way it plays like a very simple graphic shape against the complexity of the water and the other elements. And it makes it a little bit less scary for the little ones. The monsters were designed by Shion Kim. He designed the monsters, and Blue, for example, has elements of a baby seal, and it's got fish eyes that move separately, and frog skin, and the lure, of course. So the monsters I just showed you, the ones we relate to, that we have to understand, they are smoother, and they have primary colors like blue or red or yellow. And the adversaries, the ones that we are not supposed to connect with, have exoskeletons, are more pointy, and secondary colors like green, for example, here on the brickleback. Or on the next slide, you can see the purple crustacean, the giant crab monster. So let's look a little bit at the world that we designed around them. Beside the ocean itself, of course, a key environment for the film is the hunting ship, the Inevitable. And we consulted with experts. You have to learn not just how those ships work, all the details about it, but also the lingo, so you can actually communicate about the different parts of it. And we had to figure out what kind of ship it would take to go on a mission like that. And there's a few things that are particular to a hunting ship in our movie. For example, these strong figureheads in the front are protecting the hull. And there's walkways on the outside that allow the lancers to get closer to the prey. And then there's some spikes that are supposed to make it harder for the monster to wrap its tentacles around the ship. There's a lot of detail that goes into designing a tall ship. Everything is sturdy and reinforced, and we designed a lot of sea monster motifs and ornaments. For example, fixed cannons that usually those pirate ships have, we learned are not so useful in hunting monsters. So these agile swivel guns are a lot more effective. The ports, which are the windows, have carvings on them very often, but they're meant to be seen from the outside. So when you see it on the inside, it has to be upside down. And we designed every corner of the ship from the top to the very bottom, where the hold is, and the bilge where the water collects at the very, very bottom is filled with stones for balance. And of course, the nicest room in the ship is the captain's quarters. That's actually the only cabin that has real windows. And a lot of the time we're busy on deck or on the yard arms, and there's always something to do for the sailors. And we did our research and made sure that all the maneuvers that you see in the background are kept authentic and make sense in the maneuvers that are being performed right now. And that's something the audience might not really realize, but they can feel it, and it makes the movie a little more believable. So the images that you're watching right now are all part of the color script, and everyone in our art crew got to paint some of these. And then those color keys would be used as the base for the lighting department at Sony Imageworks. One important location is an island full of creatures the world and Jacob and Maisie have never seen before. And the sand on these beaches is pink from ground shells and corals, and the strong colors of the environment and the monsters represent the wild nature. The jungle next to the beach has many unknown plants, and some inspiration for those came from prehistoric forests because they're different enough to be concerning, but close enough to reality to be believable. And as night falls, they find shelter in a giant seashell in the forest. And it's a very strange environment where Jacob and Maisie have an intimate moment and they can pause and air their grievances with each other. And amazing scale differences are obviously a reoccurring theme in the Sea Beast. So in contrast of this colorful, vast, wild nature, we have the civilized human world. Access from the ocean is guarded by towers with nets. And the first little town is our first station, the town of Three Bridges. That's the home of the inevitable and a regular port for the hunters. So designing this town, I laid it out in Google SketchUp first, because this way I have an idea how many buildings we actually have to design, and I can keep the amount of buildings to a reasonable amount. And then those simple SketchUp shapes of the buildings can then be detailed by different artists. The buildings themselves, so the town, is a mix of architectural styles of the time, because it was very important to look authentic, but I didn't want to be too specific and say this is this specific place. This beautiful picture by our art director, Chris already had it in his presentation. It's an early mood painting of the town square. And that helped us to find the style where we have very bold and interesting colors, but we're also trying to simplify and play detail against very simple shapes. And then from the world of the common folk to the lavish Castle White Rock. In the throne room, there's a giant skeleton of a sea monster. It's hanging from the ceiling, and the bones are held together with gold braces. And then underneath is a floor made of shiny marble with sea monsters and the map of the kingdom. So if it seems like if you have to cross the water to get to the land where the thrones are in the center. So if you step outside from the throne room, you can step to the balcony, and you can see the color scheme here: the white marble with the gold ornaments and the green verdigris on the roof emphasize the reduced color scheme for the royals. And it fitted into the time, but Baroque also works perfectly as a counterpart to the wild ocean and the islands, because it's all about controlling nature, especially in the gardens. Again, we started with a SketchUp model. The shape of the city is supposed to resemble a compass rose that you find on a map. And then right in the center, you have the palace, so that represents the center of the known world. It was probably the largest set I've ever designed, and so it was too big for one artist. So again, because it was built in SketchUp, it meant I could give the rough shapes to different artists for detail work, and it would all fit together again in the end. And so finally, there's a painting of the entire city using the SketchUp model as a base. And that concludes my part of the design, and I'm going to pass it on to Zach and Josh, and they talk more about the actual production.
Hello. All right, animation on the Sea Beast. Hello, my name is Joshua Beveridge. I was head of animation on the Sea Beast.
And my name is Zach Parrish. I was the animation director on the film.
This turned out to be a whole lot of movie. I think it's the most complex thing we've ever made at Sony Imageworks. It's this really unique balance between a visual effects spectacle and full-out animation. And we had to make all kinds of new tools to pull it off. Off the top, easily one of the biggest challenges we had was just how much of this movie takes place on or in the water. We made a decision early on that we didn't want it to feel like everyone was just pretending to sway on the ocean. We wanted it all to feel like somehow it was actually shot at sea. to make it feel like they're all in the same ocean. The trick is we have a lot of the scene actually driven by the ocean. The ocean drives the boat then drives both the character and the camera. The scene is all constantly counterbalancing itself. It's incredibly complex, but if we did it right, it shouldn't be something you notice. Out of the 43 sequences in the film, only 4 don't have any water. There's almost 800 ocean shots and 719 shots take place on our main ship, the Inevitable. That means everything, the water, the ship, the characters, the camera, everything moving all the time.
In just 1,500 shots.
One of the first things we need to figure out was just how to float on the water without going back and forth with the effects team. Doing some research, we learned about this thing called the Beaufort scale. This scale has been used by sailors for over 200 years to categorize oceans we've been seeing, from a scale of 0 to 12, calm to hurricane. That has a relative wind speed, wave height, and wave speed. The effects team at Imageworks would generate full ocean simulations, then give those to the previous team at Netflix to actually scout the ocean and find the shot we're actually going to use and get rendered. This is a comparison of that back and forth with the water shader from previous to the render at Imageworks, and felt like a huge success.
And you can also note in this, the red arrow in the upper left-hand corner, this is our wind direction indicator that we use in animation, so the animation team knew precisely how to position the sails so that we were accurately catching the wind and everything, so that everything felt continuous through effects and character effects.
So by the time we got started in animation, we already had an ocean that was already simulated that we could trust. So then we stripped out any choppy surface detail that we didn't want to affect movement, and then created a custom constraint process for animators to triangulate a position of the ship on a moving surface. How much the ocean still moved the ship could be dialed to taste. We call this system the buoy system. We could still override it for performance choices as well.
And the important thing to know here is that every shot in the movie that takes place on the boat went through this technique. Even shots where we're below deck in the cabins went through this. We wanted to make sure that nothing felt like it was being faked. All the lanterns, everything are swaying relative to the boat. So what Josh said is crazy. We made an ocean. We actually sailed a boat on the ocean, and then we actually put people on the boat on the ocean.
And the next thing we had to find a way to do to make it easier was a way for our characters to balance. Organic water movement can be incredibly subtle and challenging to counter animate. So with the help of a rigging lead, Terry Fall, we designed a new type of pivoting system engineered specifically for standing on moving surfaces like boats. We called it our sea leg space. Without it, animators would be counter animating incredible subtle shifts just to stay in the same place. We calibrated it specifically to only pick up the boat movement we wanted and ignore the rest. Every part of the character could go in or out of this pivot system, and the position of that pivot could move depending on the pose. It all helped the team spend less time counter animating and more time focused on the actual performance.
It was one of the many huge helps on the film of really allowing us in reviews to focus purely on performance and not have to worry about the technicalities.
Totally. And we use the same trick to build a balancing rig for our cameras so that our imagined camera could feel like it was being held by an actual person standing on the same deck, moving on the same ocean with our performances. That was a huge part of making the whole scene feel more immersive and connected. Everything is constantly moving and counterbalancing each other.
So we didn't do this with just a few people on a small boat. We had crowds of people moving on massive boats, and then tens of thousands more people on land. So crowds was yet another huge challenge on this film. You know, it's really important that the world and the ships and the sea beasts felt alive and full. Chris said it earlier, no one person can sail a ship. And he usually means that as a humble way of distributing ownership of the film. But it really rang true in the crowds of this world. And this meant a ton of diligent effort to create thousands of unique characters to man the inevitable, to populate the cities and everything else. There were over 40 completely original outfits for the hunters just on the inevitable alone. About half the film includes at least some amount of crowd or crew characters in the shot, with the largest crowd shot consisting of more than 10,000 characters. And in order to scale to that proportion, all the humans in our pipe were built off of one topology with swappable features, hairstyles, clothes, textures. Literally any character model in the film could be blended into another and to create seemingly infinite numbers of variations. And then to populate the shots, Imageworks has this really unique workflow that involves really no simulated crowds. every character is hand placed by an animator. The technology was adapted from work that Josh did on Storks to create things like the Wolf Pack, which allows for users to package together groups of assets as baked geometry, but then the user can expand out any character from that group back to its rigged form to create unique animation. Coupling that with an elaborate split system, this allowed artists to handle shots with dozens or even hundreds of characters, or to share a single shot amongst multiple artists with relative ease. Huge shout out to our crowds lead, Eddie Prickett, with his incredible ingenuity and leadership skills. And I think he single-handedly did that 10,000 character shot by himself.
I think you're right. Okay, so now let's talk about ropes. Ropes are just plain old hard to animate.
They suck.
They suck. They've limited performance choices in the past, just so we avoid touching them. Usually ropes are handled in one of our effects departments whenever feasible. In the past, when that wasn't an option, we just painfully muscled through them on the very few shots where it was absolutely necessary. The amount of complex rope action on Sea Beast demanded we think of a whole new approach. Because we can recognize the woven fibers of ropes both near and far, they don't allow for very much cheating. It's too easy for them to accidentally look like some sort of rubber or taffy. The sort of actions we knew we'd be doing routinely, like hand-over-hand pulling, knot tying, and incidental slack that comes and goes whenever a character chooses to interact with it, made having predictable controls nearly impossible. So with the combined help from Dan Shear and our facility dev team on our show's rigging lead, Enoch Hildy, we completely overhauled our traditional rope rig, and we approached ropes all together in our pipeline in a unique way. We built an animation-centric procedural rope solution named SP Rope Tools.
Cool name.
Yeah, great name. We'll work with that. Instead of each shot having a specific and limited rope rig with a single purpose, we developed a Swiss Army knife rope rig that was able to adapt dynamically during a shot. We could add and remove input controls and their positions along the length, as well as adjust the length and thickness of the rope itself whenever needed. We designed the controls the animators would interact with to feel like the graph editor controls that we are used to working with. The rig would interactively show an animator where there was going to be excess slack or turn red when it became too taut. Then each animator could then pick a point along that rope, choose whether that area was going to be gripped firmly or slid loosely through, while still having the confidence the length of the rope was being protected. We called this function pinning and unpinning within the rig. Along the length of a single rope, different sections could be solved independently. Some regions hung with slack, some under tension, and then some other regions artfully placed or draped just a taste, all while still protecting that chosen length. After animation, that still go through our friends in CFX to simulate, because of the logic we already defined, the controls and animation. This also simplifies that process and made it easier to identify which areas needed to be left alone in the keyframe state and which ones for the simulation team to totally take over.
And as you can see in the video here, it ended up working out better than we'd ever hoped. And the team was able to get more creative and quickly tackle both subtle and complex situations that we couldn't have otherwise. It was incredibly liberating, like I was talking about before, to be able to be in rounds or dailies and to just be able to say what if regarding a rope and not have it be what if we cut the ropes out of the shot. It really kind of removed that burden of fear and allowed us to just focus on the performance again.
Yeah, this unsuspecting advancements already finding new homes and new adaptations on our next shows. All right, next up, Wrinkles, the best of us, but they're also incredibly expressive. I loved how liberating the ink lines were for us on Spider-Verse, and being able to simply add a line wherever we felt it helped push an expression. And just to be a little bit more specific was wonderful. We wanted to find a way to get that same sort of freedom in this aesthetic, especially that crow. He's designed with these lovely, deep, asymmetrical wrinkles that crisscross against each other. And we wanted to be able to design their placement to taste in animation, as well as avoid carrying around some sort of ridiculously high mesh that would bog down his performance. So we retooled his underlying, the underlying ink rigs we had on Spider-Verse to make what we called crease lines. We found a way to make them actually carve depth into the surface in a more sculptural way. An animator can place a rigged curve anywhere on the surface of the character and actually create a wrinkle with form. We no longer had to worry about getting it to work with the flow of edge loops in the model, or keep it locked to one location. We can artfully place them to taste per shot. They're projected from the camera to the surface of the skin and then carved along the depth, along the normals of the surface. We could derive how deeply they'd be carved in this skin by how widely we scaled what we call the belly of the curve. We wanted to feel like this, with like the same logic you'd use to draw. And then lighting could even push that even further. The thicker the line we place, the deeper the wrinkle.
And there was an added benefit to that, the evolution of this technology, and with the universal topology that we talked about before, it meant that every character, regardless of their function in the film, had this ability to have crease lines turned on. So that really helped in a few situations with background characters who needed a little bit more art direction or a little bit more tension to their faces. They all could get a little bit more detail from the system as well. So now you take that and you multiply it against the massive scope of this film, right? The animators in this film were responsible for character motion that ranged from broad human feats of action to giant monsters to incredibly subtle and emotionally rich performances, often by monsters and humans while on a boat while holding a rope. For the big action sequences of the film, a sense of weight was one of the most important things to us. So much of this movie is about these massive creatures. We really wanted to make sure that we highlighted the difference between them and the fragile humans that are hunting them in order to immerse the audience at the human scale.
Yeah, the larger and heavier something is, the more you have to build up momentum to earn speed. If you cheat that too much, it can ruin the illusion in a way that absolutely everyone can recognize. So we focused more on grounded physics than we often do in animated films.
And then layered on top of that need for grounded physics is the need for character specificity. In a film with so many characters, it was really important to us that we clearly differentiated each character in their physical abilities and in their acting choices. So with a character like Jacob as an example here, he needed to feel like an action hero that could potentially pull off these feats of action, but he still needed to feel like he was made of muscle and bone. It was really important to us that he didn't tilt into feeling like a superhero or having superpowers. For our hunters, this is life and death. The risks need to be felt. We're watching incredible people do incredible things, but we still need to believe that they feel pain and that their lives are on the line.
We thought a lot about characters like Indiana Jones or Ethan Hunt, Mad Max a great deal, where they do these high adrenaline, incredible stunts just in the nick of time, just outside the edges of their ability. Jacob is just making a plan up on the fly. It's exhausting, it's stressful, and it hurts. So much of his charm is that even he can't believe he's pulling it off.
And then you have on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, this film offered up an amazing opportunity for subtle performances. We really wanted to push for subtle naturalism to the acting, to ground the characters, immerse the audience, and deepen the stakes.
There's a lot of range in this film, but the thing I think I'm most proud of is just how subtle the performances often are. A lot of my favorite stuff lies in how much we held back. We got to push just a little bit more emotional maturity than we often do in animation. Seeing our characters do just a little bit more thinking, not always having to say those thoughts out loud, letting less be more, sitting in quieter expressions, watching characters think while still exaggerating and pushing for effect and excitement. But the more emotional weight the scene needed to carry, the less we did those sort of animation tricks.
That's right. And then in those quieter character moments is yet another place where we really need to lean into that character specificity again. When you're doing less, you have to make sure that what you're doing is the right thing, because every small change says everything. We learned this with Chris, with Baymax on Big Hero 6 even. On this film, it meant shooting a lot of video reference. Josh and I shot reference, Chris shot reference, the animator shot reference. We shot a ton of reference, and then we would look at it all, discuss the subtle discoveries and differences that we found there, and every shot was poured over with a ton of love, aka notes, to make sure that we were saying as much as humanly possible with every action that we chose. To dive deeper into that, are we going to explore Maisie?
No, I forgot about that one. Sorry.
I have that in my notes, but we're not going to talk about that. But we do have a little thing just to talk a little bit more about our crew.
Yeah, over 700 artists worked on this film. 665 artists and production staff worked on it at Imageworks alone. We're very honored to represent their work today. We'd like to end this with a little montage. Artists always put themselves into their work. For animators, it's a little bit more of a literal thing. This entire production was animated from our homes in a way that made it even more personal for a lot of us. We'd like to end by showing you a clip of some of the team behind the scenes, planning out their shots by performing them themselves. Here we go.
My son John was tall and slim, and he had a leg for every limb. But now he's got no legs at all, for he ran a race with a cannonball. Timmy Roo Dum Da, ba riddle da, whack for the riddle, Timmy Roo Dum Da. Oh, were you deaf or were you blind when you left your two fine legs behind? Or was it sailing on the sea where your two fine legs right down to your knee? Timmy Roo Dum Da, ba riddle da, whack for the riddle, Timmy Roo Dum Da. I was not deaf, I was blind when I left my two fine legs behind. Nor was it sailing on the sea for your two fine legs right down to the knee. Timmy Roo Dum Da, ba riddle da, whack for the riddle, Timmy Roo Dum Da. When I was tall and I was slim and I had a leg for every limb. But now I've got no legs at all. They were both shot away by a cannonball. Timmy Roo Dum Da, ba riddle da, whack for the riddle, Timmy Roo Dum Da. Timmy Roo Dum Da, ba riddle da, whack for the riddle, Timmy Roo Dum Da.
Fantastic, guys. Okay, I want to make sure my mic was on. Unbelievable display of work, everyone. And this is fantastic, guys, because obviously a lot of awesome work to talk about here. I saved some questions, but we have the better part of an hour now to ask our amazing panel here some questions. So please, if you haven't already, throw them in the chat. I've been saving them down as these amazing folks were going through the presentation. So I'll kind of pick through them in the order they came in and throw it to these guys to kind of go over. So, well, first off, thank you so much, guys. It's just a fantastic presentation. And Chris, even up front, loved just the messaging behind everything you had to say, and just about the, I guess the theory and thought process behind assembling a team to create something of this scope and of quality. I mean, I told you guys just at the onset of the presentation, it really is a wonderful film, and it's amazing to see, this output from just different studios than the ones we typically think of, and just the quality of work that's being produced there. So, bravo to the team, and I hope it continues to grow in popularity. I know when it was first released, there was a lot of buzz around it. My Facebook and social media was definitely blowing up with it, so I knew it was one I definitely had to check out. So, congrats to all
Thank
involved.
You. Thanks a lot again. Thanks for having us, and it's fun for us to revisit the film and talk about it, and so this is great.
I bet, especially to say, I guess, the fruits of your labor, right? How long was production for this particular show? How long would you guys say from inception to hitting Netflix?
Well, I guess it depends on how you measure it, right? Like my personal experience was probably about between 3.5 and 4 years.
Okay.
But I don't know, how do they measure production? What's the official answer to this? Does anyone know?
I think production starts when shots in the movie start.
Yeah, that was like
pre-production. Yeah,
somewhere in summer 2019.
Yeah, honestly, the start of COVID is when it happened. That's
perfect timing.
I was actually going to ask you guys about that, because in that great video that you just had that you guys ended the presentation with, it showed a lot of your fellow artists, playing out the scenes for animation, and it looked like utilizing some of their family members or roommates, and it looked like everyone was kind of at home. So I was going to ask if a good portion of this was done during the pandemic.
Nearly entirely all of that production. Yeah, all every shot that went in the movie was done during the pandemic.
Yeah, I think we have basically the entire film worth of reference as well. And there's some great stuff like in the streets of Vancouver, people acting like pirates in the streets of Vancouver just because people had to get out and run around. So it was always fun to see.
But we were lucky enough to work together across both Netflix and Imageworks during before that happened on some of the character building and world building and style finding, a lot of the asset building we gotten pretty deep into before that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely remember that the week that we got sent home, it all came on so suddenly. We were actually getting ready for what was going to be our second internal screening of the story reels. And I remember we had a tech check on a Monday for a screening that we were going to have on Friday. So we're in the theater and we were discussing this thing that was sort of gathering traction, this coronavirus, they called it at the time. And we said, well, maybe if people want the option of not attending, we should grant them that. And we'd just be understanding. And then by Wednesday, we'd actually canceled that screening. And then by Friday, everyone was sent home. And at that moment, though, we thought, oh, this might be 2 weeks or 3 weeks or a month or whatever. We weren't sure what we were exactly dealing with. But when that happened, of course, I was really concerned about the impact on the movie would be because, as I said, animation is so intensely collaborative. And I think we were very fortunate that the story team and the biz dev team had been assembled and working together for almost a year and a half at that point. And so there was this cohesion and this people had gotten past the niceties, and we'd all been doing caricatures of each other and were very comfortable with each other at that point. And that translated pretty well onto the Zoom calls. And I think also the folks at Sony Imageworks, they were pretty good they had a pretty good remote setup and had done some of that already. And I think there was just at that point we'd had a buy-in on the part of the crew. I think people were invested and thought there was the potential for this thing to be hopefully something special. And so we just sort of fought through it, there is the trying to communicate on Zoom. It's not the same, as if you're trying to collaborate with a group, you do lose something, but we just decided to fight through it and essentially made the movie production wise entirely during the pandemic.
There was some birth pains. Like Sony sent us these monitors that were directly linked to Sony. And so I had one at home, and Woon, the art director, had one at home. And we would keep getting into disagreements about this is too much magenta, this is too greenish, that sort of thing, until we realized that our monitors were both not matching each other. But we can't check that because we weren't together. So we had to send both in and then get them back. And little things like that make it difficult.
I guess it's those unforeseen challenges, but were there any silver linings that came out? I mean, I guess it's hard to look at and say, well, the pandemic offered something good, but were there any creative, endpoints or outlets that came of this pandemic so we could find some silver linings in it?
I've always been advocating some of the benefits for this sort of workflow. Like Chris was saying, at Imageworks, we kind of been working somewhat remotely, not from our homes, but most of the teams in Vancouver, or I'm here in LA, and a lot of the leadership's down here. It's a mixed bag between both the things we needed to feel as back and forth as possible. And there is a nice added benefit I've always liked of when you're talking about the work, you're talking about it in abstract between you, but while talking face to face, instead of that thing where you're going around from people's desk to desk and over the shoulder, backseat note giving, or even in the theater where people don't know whether to be looking forward or looking back for feedback. That sort of thing, there's in a weird way makes it more human. But the thing that we all know, conversations just aren't nearly as natural this way. But it is nice to face each other while we're talking about the work elsewhere.
Yeah,
and also
because often in dark rooms and meetings. Sorry. So I can actually see the other person at Sony that's talking out of the dark somewhere in their cinema. So this was actually more personal to see their faces while having on the other screen the movie and talking about the image. And then we set up something for the artists. We used Bluescape, which was super helpful. And we had that set up before already, so we could live annotate stuff on the screen while actually looking at the artist and talking about it.
Yeah, and I'll kind of second what Josh said, third what Matthias said, which was, one of the benefits, especially for character animation, is so much of what we do is talking about how our bodies are communicating. And so not having to stand up in front of a theater or in a dark room or something like that, all of us were standing there acting out different ways. I had my shovel. It's not in here anymore, guys. But I had my shovel that was my trusty spear, so we could really use our bodies to communicate what we needed, which I guess, helped some of the gaps in communication that arise from the stagnant conversation style that happens in meetings like this.
Sure. No, it's really interesting to hear, because it's talking to individuals in the industry, whether it's game, film, animation. I was curious to hear how everyone sort of adapted to these pipelines. And obviously, at the end of the day, it's a game of communication. You guys, touched on that, but I think, I think the creativity that went into the film is obviously present in the way that you guys made it work and made it all come together. So, hats off to certainly all involved. With that, I started just collecting a few questions here, guys. So I'll throw them out. We'll intersperse it with some questions of my own. I'll throw your way. Let's see here. I'm gonna try and I apologize if I butcher anyone's username. And some of this may have been covered. I took the questions; they came in at different points in the panel. So some of these things you guys may have covered briefly. But Mr. 5x5x5 asked, "I was astounded by the use of color in the film. Could you speak to the exceptional color use in the sequences towards the beginning at sea with the gigantic shellfish creature? How did any production strategies help to rock such an incredible color story?"
I used the same colors that everybody's using. So I don't know. I built up this logic before the movie starts. What helped is that even though Chris told the story of the, first it was a baby, and then, the movie changed quite a lot. For me, a lot of things stayed the same. So I could start with a color logic for it. Like I touched on that a little bit in my presentation already. And so there's like three things I'm looking out for. One is, for example, having these like really vibrant monsters that are so different from the human world, and that contrast. There's a lot of contrast between detailed, simple, or strong color and muted colors. And then, of course, I'm looking at the mood of the scene. That has to work. And then I'm hoping that there is, and that's part of coloring the monsters like this, there's a look of the film. Like I would love to have one frame, and the audience can say this is the sea beast, that looks like that film.
I think Matthias puts a lot of thought into planning out the story script, and there were a couple ideas that I thought were really particularly cool. One was just the red sails for the inevitable. Obviously, red was just named red in the script, so she was going to be some version of red. But it was Matthias's idea to make the sails red, and there's something about that. It just looks cool, but it indicates that it seems to indicate it's the counterpart to red, and so you get this feeling of the ultimate monster versus the ultimate ship, and that they were going to be on a collision course. There was an inevitability to their conflict, which I thought was really cool. And then there's kind of an acidic kind of yellow color that gets introduced. And it's one of those, he does one of those things where you anticipate it a little bit. So when the characters start talking about the Gwen Batterby character, even before we meet her or go there, he teased in a little bit of that color, so you would connect it when you got to the island, that yellow. So he's sort of weaving colors through the story.
It's really fascinating. Yeah, the use of color. I think that was one of the first things that really, obviously lighting and the color played into that, but just the impact that had on just the feeling you guys were capturing. And you did talk about in the presentations, whether it was look and feel of the characters, but color was definitely one of the first things that I think you notice in an animated film, and depending on kind of what scope they're, what direction the story is gonna go. Very fascinating stuff. And two, I wanted to kind of piggyback on that because you guys had brought up the stylization of the characters, and that always fascinates me. I'm a concept artist by trade, and on the character design. So I'm always looking at that, whether it's live action products or considered more photoreal or the more stylized, and seeing what you guys did with it. I was going to ask, you said you guys found kind of an area where the characters were slightly stylized. You know, they are kind of that stylized the proportions, but you said in terms of the stretch and pull and such, they're kind of constrained. The environment itself is meant to be more realistic. How far did you guys push it before you ultimately settled on the direction you wanted to take it with the character designs?
I think it was set as a bar early on in the first conversations with Chris, where it wasn't about like pushing back. He, like, the first sequence you showed me was the action sequence where Jacob is doing these like wild things and throwing a spear at like a superhuman ability. And you immediately, the thing you mentioned was how much you wanted to make sure it didn't feel like he was a superhero. Make sure it didn't feel like he had some sort of like exaggerated powers, but how he keep it fun. So that was like, I made the target specific. It wasn't like wildly trying to find it from the beginning. It was a specific target from the beginning. But I think the boundaries being don't want to land on cartoon and not trying to recreate reality. It's just whenever it felt like it was one of those two things, you edge the other way.
Absolutely. No, it's really fascinating because like I mentioned, just saying like the environment, everything that felt, there were shots where I go, this could have been a live action film. This could be just
we did overshoot just very slightly, and then had to pull back
okay.
on some wrinkles or something like that. But the idea was also always that, you know, we grew up with the Disney movies and we liked that style, you know, the classic animation style. We just wanted to twist it a little bit towards realism, towards not realism necessarily, towards believability. And so that was the aim. And I think we kind of got there relatively fast. There was other things that were hard, but, you know, the hair, for example. But
yeah, that distinction between reality and believability, like it's a feeling one. Reality seems like it's a little bit more of a scientific pursuit, and where the target is crystal clear, the thing we know and see. And believability it just says you're seeing the choices more.
And I think that's why you saw a very emphatic head nod from all of us on the word believable, because it was kind of a resounding thing all the way through production and making sure that everything felt believable but not necessarily real. And I think that dovetails into the animation choices, the posing, everything. You know, Chris pointed us toward, you know, Norman Rockwell paintings and things of that sort, which are very observed, but also a little bit pushed, a little bit stylized. There's an editorialization there to what the choice is that focuses your attention on the choice that's being made and the message that's being said. And so that was something we were always trying to do, is making sure that we weren't rotoscoping, we weren't using motion capture, we were making sure we were making choices. And that's true of every design, every lighting scenario, kind of everything is just that edge where it's an editorialization of something real.
Yeah, I mean, everything in animation is a choice, right? Like nothing happens by itself. So it all starts with just long conversations and trying to sort of together articulate what we're going for. And as far as the design, as far as the aesthetic, there were early conversations that I had with Matthias where we were trying to gauge sort of the level of cartooniness and versus realism. And there's not really a good or bad necessarily. Like the Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, I think is an amazing looking movie and one of my favorite animated movies, and very sort of broad and cartoony in its design, and it's awesome, right? But then you could push all the way to the other direction of trying to fool people into thinking they're looking at something that is live action, right? So you have to kind of figure out where are you on that scale. And we knew we didn't want we wanted to stay away from the uncanny valley, and we knew something as broad and cartoony as Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs wouldn't be right, because we wanted it to be in a world that felt there was real peril and that people could really get hurt in this world. And so it nudged us a little bit away from the cartoony end of the spectrum. And then of course the danger was, well, we don't want to go to the uncanny valley or make it appear that we're trying to make them look photoreal, you know? And it was sort of coincided with conversations we were having about the look of the world itself, where I really wanted to prioritize the world building and make it feel like this is a world that has a history that led up to this point, and that there are things going on outside the frame. And so I would talk to everybody who joined the show about movies like Blade Runner or Lord of the Rings and the Game of Thrones series, where you got a sense that they really created a comprehensive world and that they knew the world that existed beyond the specific linear story that's being told. And I wanted to get that sense that there was more out there, you know, and ultimately what that means is really sweating the details. Like it's going to be in the details, and it's going to be thinking in terms of this is a world with a history. And obviously we had an incredible Viz Dev crew, and Matthias and Moon, I think, really loved the challenge of that, of creating a really plausible and truthful feeling world. And obviously I was the beneficiary of some incredibly talented artists, and the movie was the beneficiary of some incredibly talented artists who really took that edict seriously.
That is fantastic answers, everyone. No, I think that's terrific in finding that scope. I think that's great. That was definitely one of my first takeaways when the film started. And you guys mentioned too about the real peril, because I think maybe it's a preconceived notion, unless you're going into animated content for adults, you know, the idea being that it's going to be, let's say, a little more lighthearted, right? If you find an audience, you go, what is the peril of this? And I think seeing that, you know, Sea Beast was actually taken down, well, spoiler alert for anyone seeing the film, but early on in the film, we actually see one of them taken down. You know, protagonists, they're suffering wounds and such. And I thought, wow, this has those stakes. So then I think even as a viewer was even that much more, I think, vested in it, because it had real consequences beyond I guess the Disney idea of just losing a parent. You know, it felt like anyone could go in this story. And I think that definitely played into the drama just as the viewer. I was really fascinating.
Yeah, let me jump in there, because I think you hit on something that I really wanted for this film, which is a feeling of ambiguity a little bit. I think that there's sometimes with movies there's a sense that people that you have to know exactly how you're supposed to feel, and you're only supposed to feel one thing from one moment to the next. And if there's any sort of confusion about how to feel, then we're doing something wrong, right? But my favorite movies were from the 70s. That's my favorite era of filmmaking. And when I think about those films, when I'm watching The Godfather, I'm not to compare this movie to The Godfather, the greatest movie ever, but when I'm watching those great movies from the 70s in that era, I'm sometimes feeling conflicting feelings, you know. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. And so I knew at the beginning of the film there was going to be some ambiguity about how people would respond to the idea of the monster hunting, because as much as we set up the Jacob's backstory and we wanted the crew to be likable and present the monsters initially as the aggressors, there's still going to be it's still a modern audience that's watching it, and there's on some level there's going to be a correlation to whaling and things like that. You're seeing a large sea mammal get killed, and I knew that was going to be a little bit of people could have misgivings about that, but I think that's okay to feel slightly uncomfortable or to feel mixed feelings in the course of a movie from one moment to the next. I think ultimately you have to have a point of view in the movie. Ultimately, you have to have a statement that you're making. But I think it's okay for the audience to feel conflicting feelings, and at times to be catching up to the story, be presented with something that they don't quite get in the moment that they come to understand later, or we bring clarity to a moment later. I think that's something that we've kind of gotten away from as well, that I think is unfortunate as far as more contemporary studio filmmaking. And so I found that I was able to indulge things like that in a way that I hadn't before, and it was really exciting.
That's fascinating. Yeah, it's wonderful. I don't want to monopolize the time here, guys, so I'll throw it to another question here, and as well on our Gnomon live streams. The questions vary. There's a lot of our viewers looking to break into the industry. Some are already industry vets. So some of these questions may be more on the technical side, but that's kind of why we join here and want to throw it to you guys, the professionals, the artists working on these great projects. Kate Wynn asked, I've been told in the past that getting in and improving your worth will give you the chance to tell your own stories. But do you think someone who starts as an asset modeler can have the chance of becoming an art director or writer, in your experience, of course?
I can jump in on this first if you guys want me to, because I got to do a whole lot of jobs in my previous life at Disney. I started as an animator. I kind of worked my way up through the ranks there, but then I also got to jump over and direct some of my own stories. That's me. Sorry, my name's and there are programs at most major studios now that are trying to support artists who are trying to transition between departments or trying to tell their own stories. There are there's a group at Netflix where you can, it's called Pitch Masters, where you can pitch your ideas and try to workshop your ideas to try to present to executives. I did a short circuit short at Disney, which is a program entirely for that purpose, where they've had directors from basically every department possible who got to write and direct their own films. And so I think every major studio has some variation on that, where they're trying to kind of grow their talent in multiple ways, because everybody's better as a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah, and I'll second that and say that as long as you're continuing to work at your craft, whatever you're really excited about, opportunities can present themselves. One of our, we had a young story artist, Mia, who made a massive contribution to this movie. She boarded so many of the scenes and was so great in the story room. And she was a PA at another studio in her job before this one. So, but she was really committed and dedicated to the idea of storyboarding, and she worked really hard, and she got there. And so it's definitely possible.
I have to say, on the art side, you need a portfolio. Like if you just focus on modeling only, you're not gonna break into the art direction or anything like that. It usually comes from BizDev artists. And for example, in our movie, I think 3 of our BizDev artists are now art directors. So I would try to break into that by creating a portfolio and drawing.
Yeah, I think a leap like that would take initiative. It's not like the kind of thing someone's going to go, "Hey, you should do this next." It's something you'd have to show you have this passion for this, in addition to this thing you've been working on.
That's a wonderful note, John. Yeah, all fantastic advice, guys. And animation is not a world I've been in, so hearing your guys' feedback, I think that's invaluable. So hopefully you guys heed that advice. That's really good. You kind of have to show you're hungry, dive into it. First, Zach, I wanted to, because I didn't bring this up at the beginning, but I can't wait to tell my wife that I talked to you, because she absolutely loved Us Again. We were on Disney Plus going through the shorts, which is wonderful that they have given it that, that outlet to just kind of scrub through. It moved her to tears, and anyone she gets to tell about, she does. So I just want to say congrats on that. She is a huge fan of that short. So
well, thank you very much.
Me as well, but of course
that means a lot to me. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, I just wanted to pass that along. And I think for those that have seen it, I know obviously our audience are huge fans of all things animation. So if you guys haven't yet, please go check out Zach's work on Disney Plus under the shorts. It's called Us Again, and you did one called Puddles as well. Yeah. Let's see here. Well, to maybe go a little bit more specific, and Matthias, maybe this goes your direction, sir, but Jeffrey Smith asked, what was the inspiration for the sea monster designs? You did talk about this a little bit, and was there any intentional contrast in the detailed dark colors of the human characters versus the colorful and smooth monsters?
Yeah, I touched on that a little bit. It's something that I just wanted to push, and I think that contrast and a big amount of people it's funny because now we get this live feedback, on Twitter and so on, so you can see what people like, what they didn't like, and I think lots of people got it, and some people were a little thrown off by it. But you just do what you believe in and try to push that, and it's just a graphic choice. And then Chris has a great story about Shiyun's inspiration based on a chair.
I haven't heard this story.
It's not
Well,
a story.
It doesn't surprise me at all, though.
No, that's a very Shiyun thing to do.
well, yeah. I mean, Shiyun is an incredible designer who designed a lot of the monsters, creatures in the movie, and we were at another panel, and Shiyun was trying to articulate his approach, and I pointed out that he's someone who has sort of a mystical ways about him, because he would oftentimes work very strange hours, and sometimes I'd leave pretty late at night, and he would just be arriving, and he would work all night, and I remember once I came in the morning and he'd been there all night, and he was like, "Hey, Chris, so yeah, I was looking at chairs all night, and here's a monster I drew." So he will look at things completely unrelated and just sort of be drawn in or inspired by the aesthetic, and the shape language, and he's always looking for inspiration wherever it lies, right? And then he'll take that and filter it and apply it. So I was always really he operates in some other level, you know.
That is fantastic.
Another thing I'll point out about the monster designs is we met with someone who was an expert on large mammals, and one of the things he pointed out was once creatures start getting very big, energy conservation is really critical. And these are creatures that are very big, that are going to be pushing through the water, right? And so friction starts to become a real issue. And so they want as frictionless a design as possible to be able to push through the water more easily. And so I really put a premium on really sort of simple and clean and fluid designs for our creatures.
We heard the word hydrodynamic from you a lot.
Yeah.
Hydrodynamic, yes.
I like that.
It was great.
It's one of
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry?
It was great to see actually then simulated water working hydrodynamically on that object going through the channels that it's to go through.
Yeah. I mean, when they're working on the water, it's that combination of artistic choices and then the sim as well, right? And sometimes, red or creature would carve through the water or break the surface of the water, and it really seemed aerodynamic in a way that felt very believable. And that to me is one of those things where, like, I kept leaning, or I kept going first the more truthful choice, whatever made things seem more plausible, more believable. I would always lean in that direction.
That's fantastic. Oh, and actually, I wanted to piggyback on kind of the design question, because you guys talked about making everything so accurate, and you talk about the hydrodynamics. That's the great buzzword of the day. I like that. I'm storing that away. But we talk about obviously the sea life, but you talked about just the life of the ship and even the movements of the ship. What kind of, I guess, reference gathering or research did you talk to, Navy, or ship captains? Like, how did you guys handle all of the sort of nautical, realities that came along with making it so accurate in the film?
Well, I guess, I mean, I was the first person on, and I know really not very much about. I didn't know very much about the ships. I knew I loved the movie Master and Commander. I love movies set at sea, but I actually get kind of seasick. And so I haven't been out at water very much myself. So I knew I needed to really learn about these ships and how they work. And so I went to a couple of naval museums. I went down to San Diego. I actually went to the ship where they shot Master and Commander, and they let me kind of walk around and pull on ropes and really figure out the mechanics of it, like how it actually works. And then we started a relationship with a guy named Gordon Lacko, who was one of the consultants on Master and Commander, very knowledgeable about ships in that era. And he was very passionate. And that's one thing that those ship people is passionate about ships. And so I would send him an email question or talk to him on the phone, and he would send back just reams and reams and reams of information. And it really helped it feel more plausible. And I think it was pointed out in the presentation that all the ship's maneuvers were as accurate as we could possibly make them. So if a ship is needs to turn. We would look at the wind direction, figure out what the sails needed to do, and we'd have the right crew members pulling on the right ropes as best we could to make it feel real. And an audience might not know whether the right things are happening, but they do feel it. And if you really sweat the details and pay attention to those things, it adds up to an experience that just feels more immersive. And we got really good feedback from that community of people who are enthusiastic about ships, and that honestly felt really good, because I didn't want those ship guys coming after me, So we really put a premium on getting that right.
We had all these grand plans with the team where we're gonna go on some excursions, get on some actual boats together. That all got blown up by the stupid pandemic. and so we ended up just having to watch a lot of movies too, in addition to consulting the experts, when they're looking for the dumb details, how much should a lamp be swinging. We just gathered a whole bunch of reference clips we found that the most useful movies were Master and Commander, the Charlton Heston Moby Dick, and Union the Bounty. Those ones are all films that are mostly shot at actual sea, and so we had super cuts of, this is how much the people would be swaying, this is how much the rope ladders move around, this is how much the masts are bowing when they're tilting. All those things were just picking apart details in those things.
I mean, Master and Commander was really inspiring, and the fact that it was staging shots with so many ropes, you would never see it. And animation ships usually have 5 ropes, and so we really, from the beginning, wanted to have, I don't know, it's 4,000 ropes or something like that on the ship. And yeah, thanks Sony for doing it.
One specific thing the experts told us that I wouldn't have known otherwise was just how to climb a rope ladder. You don't go rung over rung like this. That's for the noobs. It has to go side to side like this. Only the horizontal ones are just for your feet. So there's taut ones that hold up on the side. So we made sure no one on the boat ever held the rope ladder like that.
See, you guys mentioned before, it's me as an audience member, I wouldn't know that, but you said those little things add up to sell that believability. So that's really those little anecdotes are really fascinating. Ed, I believe it's Ed Otter. Well, thank you for coming, Mr. Otter. Mr. Williams, please tell us more about the background of this incredible world, particularly the obvious gender and racial diversity of the cast. It was obvious that this was normal in that world.
Yeah, I mean, it always starts with conversation. We knew we needed to make choices up front, and that's one of the things we talked about. Is you could make a choice to have a cast that would be you had a Master and Commander. That could be the makeup of the crew. But we knew this was a fantasy world, and because of that, we were able to populate the world, and especially the ships, with the crew that resembled our own world more accurately. And I think there was a lot of enthusiasm on the part of our story team and our biz dev crew to go that route. And so it just meant that we just had to have a lot of conversations and try to figure out what it meant to get it right. It's a subjective thing, but it's important to have the conversations and get different people's points of view. And I was really, I'm really proud of the reaction we've gotten from people and on that front. There were a lot of people who responded by saying that they liked seeing a movie that was an action adventure genre, where they saw themselves reflected in the movie. That was something that I think we got a lot of satisfaction out of, to feel like that we did that part of it right.
Wonderful
to
hear.
We spent a long time on the subtleties of skin color. Had a photographer help us with that, because there's different shades. There's so many different shades in the movie, and in different lighting scenarios, you have to figure out how to maintain that. And so it was actually quite tricky, but worth it. And making hair look realistic and all that stuff. That just helped. It was another form of bringing realism or believability into this.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Great question. I wanted to just throw another one out because, with Chris, you mentioned earlier on in your presentation your own personal inspirations, and I think Zach, you mentioned the inclusion of Norman Rockwell or those sort of early 20th century or mid 20th century illustrators. You mentioned Wyeth. I wanted to kind of throw out to the rest of you guys if there were any other inspirations that you brought into the film. I know you guys set a visual direction. There's that mood board and kind of that aesthetic, but I was just curious if there were other inspirations, and obviously to you as well, Chris, if there were any other artists that those watching could go out and investigate themselves or look up.
The NC Wyeth was the one that I first was really drawn to, because there's something about that the look of his paintings, that the ocean feels very big, and it's always given a personality, and there's something very attractive about it. You want to be there, and he would depict these sort of scenarios that felt very that seemed like there was a really cool story being told, and so I would look at those worlds and I wanted to be in them, and that's always a great test for me. Is like, do you want to be in that place? And so that was a big one for me, and I think one of the first things that Matthias and I talked about. Were there other ones, Matthias, that you looked at?
Yeah, sometimes it's also bleeds you in a direction that doesn't work. Like, we looked a lot at the Group of Seven, which is the Canadian landscape painters in the beginning, for the lighting and so on, and simplicity. Like, we wanted to simplify the world more, but we found, and I mentioned that a little bit, once we started doing that, it became the clouds looked painted, and then the sky looked like a dome that's got clouds painted on it, and so we had to push it more real than illustrative. So that direction didn't pan out, for example. Another inspiration for me was also just the old Technicolor movies, like the joy they have in making something one color. And we actually, for a sequence at the end, a fight sequence, we put a little bit of a Technicolor filter on it in color timing.
Oh, that's really cool. Okay, yeah, because I know even Chris mentioned at the onset those kind of Harryhausen films and such, just seeing, because you can feel that. So it's kind of like these 40s, 50s creature features in there, but I like that, hearing the inclusion of the Technicolor in there. It's fascinating. And I just, go ahead.
Just to volunteer from like a performance standpoint, we referenced the whole range of movies, the gamut. That's kind of our language of how we talked constantly from moment to moment, all over the place. But there were a couple of ones we referenced more than others. Like we have these movie nights where we would watch them as a team, so we could have the same one. And one of the movies that like unlocked for a lot of the team how the Jacob and Maisie dynamic would play off each other was Paper Moon. That relationship between those two characters really like rhymes a lot with how we wanted Maisie and Jacob to play.
Yeah, big props to Josh, because he had this arsenal of reference in every review. Somebody would throw out a random movie reference and he would like that have it up because he had saved it. But yeah, it was what was really cool about working on this was it was all live action references. It's the first animated movie where I feel like there was almost zero animated movie references in our communications. It was always scenes from live action films and very good live action films like The Godfather and Paper Moon and things like that, where it was very clearly trying to set a high bar. Not that animation is a low bar. I'm just saying, like, they were all classic films that are big movies. And Josh had them all, and his dog.
Because that does a thing like just challenging the team's expectations. So like no one's working in default.
Yeah, and we'll look at for inspiration no matter what we're thinking about. So even as far as the camera goes, a lot of times in animation it tends to be, because it's such a collaborative thing, and there's such a sort of a collective decision making that goes on. Sometimes you can be kind of conservative, and so you tend to be a little bit more cautious with your camera. So I'd sometimes look at movies that were set out at sea, and I look at a movie like Jaws, where there's practical cameras actually out on boats shooting the stuff, and it's incredible how much that camera is actually moving. And we didn't go that far, but it did sort of inspire me to open up a little bit as far as that goes. And we looked at just great movies at the outset, as far as the camera plan, one of the movies that I discovered a while back that I loved, I think it was called it's a World War II movie. I think it was called The Train with Burt Lancaster. And it's the camera work in that movie is so good. And there's something very classic about it, but there's really striking compositions within it. And one of the things I was reminded of is, as I was watching, I was really focusing on the camera work and seeing how often they placed things between the camera and the characters. Sometimes I think with animation, we can fall victim to treating it like a stage, so that you have your background and you place things, then you put a character, and forget that you can play with the space between the camera and the character. So we thought about that as well, especially with something that has all the density of the ship. Really wanted it to place foreground elements and have the camera interact with those elements. So that was one of the things that one very specific thing was, I believe it was called The Train.
Yeah, remember that was one that you and Damon had in like your early presentation for like the camera language theory of the film. I'd never heard of it till then.
So good.
Aspect ratio that like matches the film too.
Oh yeah, it's awesome.
I think this is a good a time as any to give a big thumbs up to Damon O'Baron as well, our head of previs. We usually have a little thing for him in our presentation. We didn't today. But the whole film was prevised on the Netflix side, like Josh was talking about in the presentation. It was very much a collaboration between Imageworks and Netflix, where it was real sims from Sony being sent to Netflix to do the previs. But it was some of the best camera work I've ever had an opportunity to work with. And I'm so used to in animation changing all of the cameras to work for the performance. But we never really had to do that very much on this film.
Usually they'll figure that out in the anim, and it was not the case on this one. There was a good plan to begin with.
You got enough on your plate.
And amazing storyboards as well. I mean, I think all along the way, it was just, Owen Sullivan, our head of story, and his team, some of the best boards I've ever seen. So it was very much a clear roadmap to a clear roadmap to a clear roadmap all along the way.
Very cool. Actually, I've got a great question here that kind of is a nice segue, or kind of in addition to what you guys were just talking about. Squeemon asked, what would you say was the most difficult scene to animate or execute overall? And I guess you guys could all answer this.
There's a lot of competitors for that one. I think the other challenging thing is like just how often so much of the crew is close to camera. So some of the like just mathematically, the amount of days and like people working on those shots were much harder. I think the ones that ended up being the hardest for us as a group to see to completion were the ones that are more abstract with what's supposed to be happening, like certain parts of the ship in vortex tilting on the side, the things you've never seen before, like how that logic and remembering, okay, this thing I'm used to being upright is 80 degrees over and also spinning this direction, and just tracking that logic, or being on top of the crab, like where Maisie's supposed to be swinging from this one section of the crab. Those ones were the trickiest for us to conceptually get through it. But then a close competitor, I have to say, for that is all of the massive amounts of like the crowds as characters that was a big part of this, making this film feel immersive.
I think for us, go ahead. Sorry.
Yes. I'll just lump one more on top, which is one of the sequences that took a lot of iteration because of its emotional poignancy, was the Maisie's speech at the end. It wasn't necessarily difficult from like a technical standpoint, since it's mostly one character standing besides the thousands of crowds. Besides that, but to make sure that it landed from an emotional standpoint, from like an authentic character standpoint, just kind of speaks to kind of the difficulty range on this film, from incredibly technically difficult to incredibly emotionally difficult, and everything in between.
Yeah, it's hard to say. Nothing was easy. So,
well, yeah, the word scale came up a lot in this movie, and yet there were challenges at opposite ends of that spectrum, right? Because sometimes the choreography of the scenes were really complicated, and the scale of the creatures were huge, and that presents its own challenges. but then sometimes we were really attempting to go for really complex and specific and nuanced acting, and sometimes very contained and intimate acting, and that can be just as challenging or more challenging, but it's a very different challenge. And so we threw everything at the animators, and obviously they rose to the occasion.
From a lighting point of view, for some reason it was really hard to have that vortex, where the ship's being pulled. That was technically hard because it's the water becomes that funnel, but also it's hard to light something underwater when it's night, so you have to find ways of making it believable. I want the audience still to see it, and that was the hardest. For example, spoiler alert, once they're inside Red, because there's really no believable light source when they're climbing in the back of the throat, and so you have to kind of break that believability a little bit and make sure the audience doesn't think about it too much, doesn't think there is a lamp coming from over here.
Of course.
Sometimes it's the director's job to say, like, it's okay. You can put a light there that doesn't really exist.
I know, yeah. We got
just do it.
It's funny. Sometimes in animation, you're more afraid of cheating than people do in live action.
Oh yeah, that is absolutely true. Yeah,
yeah.
Because I think there's something about like that. If you're in live action, there's almost a necessity. Like we cannot see the actor put a light there. In animation, we can sit and stew and think and choose and sometimes we're very reluctant to, I don't know, break our promise to ourselves that we will not cheat, and but sometimes you have to.
It's fun to cheat. Cheat away.
But it should be a choice to cheat. Like it shouldn't come easily. To Matthias's point, like you do have to be kind of strict with yourself, but then forgive yourself if you have to cheat.
Right. We put so much effort in continuity, like that. Crow's holding the lens can't be over here. And you never really know while you make the movie what the audience will pick up, where the light will shine by accident or so. So you have to be really diligent about all these things that can be different from scene to scene, because you never do it in order. It's all random, so you have to that's often maybe why we're a little bit too picky on continuity.
It's fantastic. This is an interesting question. Ash Blosson asked, and I guess just prefacing, that I know a lot of individuals, I don't know if this is a working artist or students, when they're trying to get a feel for, I guess, their place within, obviously we had a question about breaking in, but then once they're in and maybe they're a junior artist or they're kind of working their way up. Ash Blosson asked, you guys mentioned how important it is the staff not to have fear to express their disagreements, even with the directors and the storyboarding. How do you guys approach people in a way that they don't have to tiptoe in fear or even are losing a little bit of their ego? I'm sorry, I had to kind of correct a little bit. Hopefully I got that across. But I know, Chris, you mentioned that initially in your intro presentation. But I just wanted to see if you guys could speak to that.
I think that all just comes from the boss. That's from Chris sets the tone. Make sure that that's the format we work in.
I think that's incredibly true on this film. Is Chris? I think he operates in the way that he spoke of, and it did kind of trickle down. It influenced how Josh and I interacted with our team, the leads underneath Josh, then hopefully them down to the animators and all the way back up through the chain. And it was really trying to decimate and kind of flatten that hierarchy as much as possible. Of course, there's always going to be, like Chris said, he has to be the director at some point. So every once in a while you have to say, because I said so. But that's just to kind of keep things moving as opposed to shutting people down. I think, Chris did a good job of leading by example in that regard.
Thank you. I mean, it is the leadership's responsibility and certainly the director's responsibility to let it be known that it's okay to have a different point of view. It's okay to disagree. We're here to have different points of view, and it doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that we're all gonna arrive at the same conclusion, but it's just okay for these different points of view to exist, to coexist. And I think it makes it more fun for people to be able to participate in something where they can have an impact and be heard. But it isn't, just a charity that the director's offering. It actually makes the movie better. Like you have all these smart people, and so get them in a room and get them to talk. And I really do believe that if you create that set of ground rules in the room where people are allowed to disagree respectfully, the conversation will go all these different directions, and you'll get to places you never would have gotten to if you hadn't had that sort of collective energy, And like as an example, like I mentioned, Mia Calderon was one of the story artists, and there was a point in the story where there's a point in the story where they have their first encounter with Red. And Red gets tangled in the ropes, and it threatens both Red and the ship. And Jacob feels that they need to cut the lines to save everybody. Crow does not permit him says not to do it. And at one point, it was Jacob that cut the ropes. And I thought, well, yeah, this seems like he's the one who's defying Crow, and it just felt like he was the guy who should make that decision. But Mia said, no, I think it should be Maisie. And she expressed all the reasons why she thought it should be Maisie that did it. And it didn't feel right to me initially, but it's important for me to just let these different points of view exist, not just to shut them down, or certainly to make someone feel bad for volunteering them. Right. And so I said, I see the reasons, the argument for it, but here's why I still think the right thing is for Jacob to do it. And then she was cool about it, and we went on to talk about other things, and a couple of days later she revisited it, and she was like, I really do think for these reasons it ought to be Maisie. And then the room started talking about the pros and cons, and it occurred to me that it wasn't important to me that Jacob be the one that cut the lines, but it's important that he be on the hook for it, that he's culpable for it. And so I realized, like, oh, Mia's right. There are story advantages to Maisie being the one that cuts it. And if Jacob is present but doesn't stop her, and when he had the opportunity to stop her, then it's actually way more interesting, because now these two characters who are kind of an adversarial, have an adversarial relationship at that point, they're both on the hook for it. So they share that, and so it really sort of connected them. And I was only able to, we collectively were only able to arrive at that conclusion, the better version, because Mia had this a different point of view, and because she stuck to it, and she wasn't afraid to volunteer it. And so that's one example of 10,000 in the movie, where the movie got better because people brought their own perspective to it.
That's really fascinating. Yeah, because I guess you guys answered it. I guess the question of finding those opportunities to voice your thoughts, I think and I think we've all felt it, especially as we're working in a collective effort, like how much input are we allowed to give? At what point is it not adversarial, but like you said, once leadership is chosen, hey, that's the direction we're going to go. When you just simply say, yes, that's what we're going to do. I think that's some great advice, Chris. I think that's wonderful. So hopefully that answers the question. I'm sure it does. Let's see here. This is just, I just wanted to pass this along. Really nice comment from Esteban Rivera. This movie is one of the best animated movies I've ever seen. It can be used as a case study for realization. Great job to all involved. So I just wanted to pass that along to the crew. Big congrats.
We like that question.
Yes. I'm sure there's plenty more here. Absolutely. I think that's been echoed. That sentiment's been echoed a few times here in the chat. Let's see here. I believe it's Cy Sable. I apologize, guys. There seemed to be a sea change in the mood theme of the film when the characters arrived on Monster Island. Was this planned, or did this just happen organically?
I'm thinking sea change is how it becomes greenish, and the color change maybe.
I believe so. So if you want to clarify,
so, yes, that was definitely on purpose. And it's actually, it happens gradual. You can see it better on the way back. The Dregmore Sea, that the beginning, we actually really darkened the water. So it's like a really deep blue and nearly to black. and then Monster Island, it becomes very colorful. And it was actually not easy to get it. I mean, I didn't work in Moana, so I don't know how they did it. What we actually had to put a light underneath to get that effect. And it really only, I mean, in reality, it means that it's quite shallow and the sand underneath, it's visible. So we needed a certain depth, so we actually lit it from the bottom. But that was
Wait, I didn't know this. You put a light underneath the beach or the jungle?
underneath the water. Gives you that.
Oh, the
green.
water. Oh, sorry. Okay, that threw me. Okay.
So that was just part of the making it colorful and that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. That did seem like a kind of a not seismic, but like a very important shift in the story once it took, because there are those parallels, like you mentioned, Chris, like the 76 Kong. For me, I love the 33 one, and they're always the parallel of kind of Strainer going to Skull Island and all the creatures and stuff, and I love that parallel on it. That's always a fun thing when it's like you survive the voyage and you get to that beach and you hear from the trees, and I thought, oh, this is great. Another great opportunity to get some great creature effects in there. I just want to throw this out to you guys. I was curious, like I'm sure you can't say much about next project, but I was just curious, to hear from each one of you, if you were to jump in next project, like what would be kind of maybe a dream genre of animation, or kind of what kind of story would you guys want to tell next?
I'm dying for someone to make a big budget animated horror film.
Oh,
That would be cool.
I like the sound of that.
That's a really hard question.
Well, I mean, it is a hard question. I mean, one of the things that it makes me think about is just how far we've come in a way. Like when I was going to school, it was a long time ago. Old man Williams here. And at the time when people thought about animation, it was pretty synonymous with Saturday morning cartoons. People did think of it as kids fare, and just that, and when I think about where we were then versus where we are now, I think it's incredible the progress that we've made. I mean, it was, I don't know if it was an especially viable career path when I was going to college to study animation. It was just it was a Hail Mary. I mean, I wasn't good at very much, and my mom really was worried about me and strongly encouraged me to go to study animation. But now it's like it's a really thriving industry, and obviously you see all these animation studios have sprung up, and there's a high bar that we're setting for ourselves, and we're really excited and motivated by what all the other studios are doing. And when you look at all the animation, live action movies and video games and the great TV animation that's going on, it's incredible how far we've come. And I think the thematic ideas people are taking on and I've become very sophisticated. And when I think about, the fact that North American audiences really came to discover Miyazaki's films, and when I look at a movie like I Lost My Body, how incredible that movie is. Animation is just continuing to expand what people's perceptions, and I think there's still room to go, but I think it's worth acknowledging that we've come a long way.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of room to go. Like it's been, because it's so expensive, it's been so hard for animation to take risks, and like by little by little that's being solved.
Yeah, and Spider-Verse was a part of that, expanding, surprising people with the look and the subject matter and the tone and everything. That was incredible, and so we need to just keep taking risks and don't make the next Spider-Verse, make something that people haven't seen before.
Yeah, like that. We could tell, like, while that movie was being made, it felt like the industry was rooting for us, like in a way I'd never been part of a project that felt like that.
For sure.
Yeah, I got some things I want to try out. Like, can we do a whole movie in one shot?
Oh, nice one take.
Real serious movie, like like Grave of the Fireflies or Breadwinner. That would be great to work on. I'm curious about like AI. Like maybe somehow could that be integrated in animation? There's so much more to explore.
I feel like we could have a whole panel devoted to AI art. I'm always curious to hear artists and creatives take on it. I know it's a mixed bag right now, but I'll leave that for another time. But yeah, it definitely offers up some intriguing questions in terms of.
I'm scared of all technology, so I'm scared of that one too.
Well, it obviously didn't show here, Chris, because you guys did made a beautiful film with it. So,
well, there was my technical expertise did not come into play. I am useless when it comes to technology, so I get none of that credit.
Well, bravo to all involved. Yeah, no, it was terrific. But I agree with Josh. I think a horror film. We want to see that. I know a lot of horror hounds. I think. Love, Death, and Robots has been that kind of look into that, so I'm excited to see. So hopefully you guys can jump in and make something there. But as our time is quickly wrapping up, gentlemen, so I just wanted to throw it to you all for any sort of final thoughts. If there was anything else you'd like to share, what does the future hold for each of you? You know, I'm sure if something's not announced, you can't talk about it just yet, but is there anything exciting to look for on the horizon from you guys? No pun intended.
Well, with the time, I do want to acknowledge there's a question I like here, which is Chris in front of a green screen, or does he really live that life?
Oh, that is a good question. I missed that one.
And this is actually a physical thing that I am very proud of. I made this because my room, I'm in my home office here, and my room is a mess. And so I put this themed backdrop up myself. So yes, I wanted to point out
all your next secrets right behind it.
The next movie is. I mean, we've talked a little bit about the idea that a sequel to the movie is possible. But the nice thing is that Netflix isn't going to force it. If I don't want to do it, or if we don't. If we can't find a great story that's worthy of the original, then we don't have to. And so that's about as far as we've taken it.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm staying with Netflix and working on something else right now that's completely different. Maybe it's going to be made, I don't know, but it's just it's a cool place to try different things.
Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to Chris's thing. It's about where we're at as an industry right now. So I think it's an exciting time for all of us because there's so much potential. Be it at Imageworks or any other studio, the quality is insane, and the challenges are more insane from the amazing creators like Chris. And so I'm still at Netflix, but I'm excited just to work on anything that I can get into emotionally. Going back to your question, I think, it doesn't really matter to me genre wise, although I would love an animated horror film, as long as it's a compelling story with compelling characters that I want to spend my years with. And there's just so much of that happening right now, industry wide. So it's a cool time to be there.
We're lucky in this career that each new project or movie we work on is like a new thesis. Like it's a thing that you can be obsessed about, like really intensely, and just live in for several years, and then move on to the next obsession.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it feels like I only just started the industry yesterday, and somehow I find myself like, oh, I guess I'm one of those animation veterans now. But when I look at when I was watching the reel that played before the talk, I was just stunned by the work. It was incredible. And when I think about this next generation of talent being infused into the industry, that gets me really excited, and just the artistry and the technology both advancing really hand in hand, and the technology, the art inspiring the technology, and vice versa. It's really, really exciting to see where this goes next.
Absolutely. Actually, and two on that note, guys, I just wanted to throw it out to each one of you. Is there anywhere that our viewing audience and those that watch after the fact can follow you guys online or find your work or your musings? Any like social media platforms you guys would like to share?
Yeah, I got a website, matthiaslechner.com.
Okay.
You can look at the portfolio of art there.
I was gonna say you can check me out on Instagram. It's mostly these pictures of my daughter, though. If you're
I've never. Do you want to give that out, Zach, or no?
Nope.
No. Okay. I've never actually given up my Twitter handle, and I actually had to double check what it is. It is it's at just Chris, capital J, capital C.
All right,
yeah,
just Chris. Fantastic.
yeah, that's me.
Oh, wonderful, guys. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else, and I think James might be throwing it up here.
There it is.
Wonderful. Well, yeah, guys, as we're wrapping up, I mean, first, I can't thank you all enough. I'm just checking to see if we had any last minute questions. Yes, artsy steps at Netflix with more animation anyway makes me happy. Couldn't agree more. Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, the diversity it's coming out, just there's some really solid quality work coming out of, like you said, both existing studios, the new upstarts. Really exciting time. A lot of great art being created. So yeah, once again, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us this evening and giving us such a wonderful insight into the making of The Sea Beast. It's a terrific film. If you're watching tonight, sorry if anything got spoiled, but I can promise you it certainly doesn't ruin the movie. Please go support the movie. Go check it out on Netflix. I want to thank, first off, we'll start with Mr. Chris Williams, writer and director, production designer Matthias Lechner, animation director Zach Parrish, and of course head of character animation Josh Beveridge. Thank you all so much. This is the amazing team behind Netflix's Sea Beast. Thank you all for joining the Gnomon live stream and checking us out this evening. Please do yourself a favor and subscribe on our different channel, whether it's the Twitch channels or on YouTube. Go show some love to our sponsor, Lenovo. Let them know how much you're loving what Gnomon's putting out. The more support you show them, the more support they'll show us, and it'll give us more opportunities to host more amazing talent like these guys here this evening. It was fantastic hosting you all. And yeah, and I guess until next time, everyone stay safe, stay creative, and we'll see you all on the next Gnomon live stream. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. It was awesome.
Thank you.
Real pleasure,
Thank you,
y'all.
guys.